I'd start with the pictures since they're what I think are really cool, and I love show and tell. So this little guy, as you can see, has a couple holes in his leg. And let me move out of the way. You can see there's like a little pus pocket there. If you look on the inside of his ankle on the left side, up where the mom's thumb is, you can see a couple other little round spots there. Then that's different. And then this is an adult male. You can see there's two spots here, and they've kind of got a yellow center to them. And you can see he's got here a whole bunch of them where they've kind of coalesced a little bit. If you want to see more definition, you're welcome to come up and look at them later. I wanted to mention these because these are what I see in Uganda sometimes, and they're called bot flies, and what they are is they're little flies that are in the sand and the dirt that the key is you usually see them on exposed appendages, things that have been exposed to dirt. You don't normally see them under clothes because the clothes protect from the dirt. And these little guys like to lay larvae, and those holes are from the larvae. The good thing is that if you do nothing, they will eventually die under the skin. And that's when the pus starts coming out, is when they're dying. But if you can catch them soon enough, you can squeeze them out, and they're pretty darn painful to squeeze out. You got to get all the way to the bottom. But you could try and squeeze them out, and it's already died, and all you're getting out is the pus left over from the body. This actually is pretty common in other places in Africa. And the key to this is the simple cure is wash off before you go to bed. So I know some missionaries in Kenya, and fortunately their soil doesn't have this. I don't know if it's been treated at some point, but their kids don't get a lot of this, and they send them to bed with dirty feet. But one reason I wanted to mention this is there's a lot in the soil that you don't know about. There's a lot in the dirt that you don't know about. We talked about tetanus yesterday, but this is one of the diseases, and I've pictures of feet that are just macerated because of different people going around without shoes on. Now this one is from the dust and the dirt, so what they usually recommend is wipe off the dirt before you go to bed. If you don't take a full shower, at least take a washcloth and wash the exposed areas of dirt. Now it doesn't normally have to be hands, but in this case I think this guy was a farmer, the other one was a little kid who was running around without his shoes on, and then probably put to bed or to nap, and the little critters walked around and got him while he was sleeping. So when I think of this, when I was first starting in Uganda, I would go, oh, I have no clue, and I'd have to ask the missionary, because the missionaries, you guys are going to be the experts in your location, in your field. You're going to be the ones that I go to when I'm on a medical trip and say, what is this? And now I look at this and I go, oh, I know what this is. It's a bot fly. I don't have to think about it anymore. But you also need to recognize different pictures of different things. So, and this little baby most likely is a fungus. You can kind of see around the toes. And it's obviously better definition on here, but probably is a fungus that the baby's got. But sometimes we don't know, and you'll have to learn through trial and error and through talking with medical professionals what are the things that are in your area. You also, along with pictures, one reason I put this picture on here, we'll come back to it, is should you or should you not intervene? Now this spot, this person was really worried about it, kept scratching at it and scratching at it, and it's just something to be left alone. It's probably just an ingrown hair or something like that that just needs to be left alone. But I put this on here because people come to you and be like, what is this bump? You do it to me all the time. What is this? It's nothing. Especially if you see these little bumps on people's shoulders and upper arms. Young ladies typically get very worried about it, especially American ladies, but I'll see that even in other countries, and they'll just see these little bumps and they're all over the top. Well, it's typically something called hyperkeratosis pilaris, which is the little hair cells just get extra little bumps. And actually, the more you scratch at it, the more you scrub at it, the worse it gets. And it's just cosmetic. There is a medicine we use in the US for people who are really, really bothered by it, but I personally don't prescribe it because all it does is it makes the skin cells wear away faster so the bumps don't get as big. And this could be that if it was in the right spot, that would be what it looks like. It's just a whole bunch of little bumps on the arms. And again, it's typically people who are self-conscious about body image. We'll come back to this one. And this gentleman came to me because he's like, oh, I've got all these dark spots, and up near his eyes you can see a couple little dark spots. If you look really closely, you'll see a little dark spots. You'll see this especially in fair-skinned people, but I've seen it in dark-skinned Indians as well. And it's called melasma, and he was very, very bothered by this. Now, me as a doctor, I was more worried about other things, but all he cared about was this. And the one thing I had to learn on mission trips is you might be concerned about the blood pressure that's 200 over 120, which is in stroke range if it stays there very long. But they're worried about their face. And sometimes you don't have the time to do both, or they're not going to follow on your medical care. So you might be worried about it. You might be trying to convince them to care about their blood pressure, but they care about their face. And so listen to what they care about, not what we as Americans think should be the most important. This person, the reason I put this one on here is the nails. You might see this a ton in the US and overseas. See how they're kind of yellowied and darkened? Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit. You see how they're kind of yellowy and darkened? Typically that's fungus, but it would depend on the person and what they wear, but a lot of times this is fungus in both countries. If they're not diabetic, it doesn't need to be treated. For some reason they have found, they don't know exactly why, but if you're diabetic and you have this, you have increased mortality, which means death. However, if you're not diabetic, it just looks bad. And the medication for this, for the pills, is very liver toxic. So I have people come on trips and say, can you get rid of this? And I tell them no, because even if I had the medicine, I wouldn't use it. Because I have to check liver enzymes every 6 weeks. And I'm currently growing out my own toes to see how long it takes, because somebody at a church in the spring, back in April, did the wonderful thing of having manicures and pedicures for all the missionary wives, and me. And so I deliberately haven't scrubbed off my toenail because it was April. So May, June, July, August, September, October, almost 6 months. Actually, it has been 6 months because we're at the end of November. And my toenails still haven't grown out. Now, why do I say that? Because the traditional medical wisdom is your toenails grow out in 3 months, so it's only 3 months of medication. Well, if that fungus was all the way at the base like it is here, my toenail is still growing out, even that little pinky toe. My fingers are different. I have to cut my fingernails every 2 weeks. But toenails, if you don't get all of that off, you leave even a speck and it doesn't get completely clipped off, it's just gonna start regrowing again. This individual came to us, and this was in Guyana. Can you kind of see where it is on her face? So if you're overseas, I like this picture because I wanted to show you, if you're overseas and you see something on a skin, take a 90-degree shot, straight on, not angled, not this way or that way, 90-degree shot, and take it with something that has size. Now, it could be your own finger if that's what you have, because we can go back and measure your finger. So if you zoom out or zoom in, we know how big your finger is, we can figure that out. But put it against something that has a uniform size, because it makes a big difference on what we will do with it and how fast we act. In this case, I'm almost sure she's got skin cancer on her nose.
Is it another spot over here too?
Yeah, there is a spot down here. But we're first worried about the nose to take care of that. And in the US, this would be considered a Mohs procedure, which has to be done by a plastic surgeon. Takes several weeks. They have to do a skin graft. But if we can get her to the surgeon, they'll also look at this one and probably take that off as well. But there's no way that this is not cancer. And so in this case, we can't fix this. But they do have a national health system in Guyana if you can figure it out. They had one hospital in the town where we were, and it was for the whole region of a couple million people, that one hospital. So we were working with the local nurse who chose to come with us to find where could this person go to go get the cancer treatment and get this removed and possibly figure out, is it squamous cell, which is bad, but at least it's localized, it will stay in the general area and it's treatable, or is it melanoma, in which case her whole body might be studded with it. And so you can see a little bit better here how it's got kind of a core in there, but I want to take one with size and one without. And so, and this person, you see how their first fingernail, I don't know what it is. It could be something as simple as eczema and at the bed of the fingernail.
What's the deal with her skin being that leathery?
Oh, she's just old.
Oh.
Yeah, she's just old.
So that's interesting.
And I'm not as worried about the brittle nails, although you can kind of see how they have these lines in them. But what really caught my attention was that first fingernail. Now, I also found out that in this case, it's not her situation, but a lot of people came by with dark fingernails. And I later found out, just from asking around and having several other people, that they actually paint their nails with henna. And they look pretty similar to this. In this case, hers is not that. But if she was in the US, I'd be sending her to a dermatologist to get evaluated to see, is this cancer? Or is it something as simple as eczema, where you can't get eczema in the base? But she's also got those Bose lines. I think they're called Bose lines. Where you see the linear lines going this way that are kind of prominent ridges. So she's got something going on, but
What
medically.
do you call the Bose lines, or what would those be from?
I don't remember, to be honest. The fact that I even came up with the name off the top of my head amazes me.
I feel like a lot of it has to do with nutrition, cause you're
Some of it, sometimes it does.
you don't have the building blocks for it.
Sometimes it does. Sometimes there's another disease process like psoriasis. I think if it has pits, a lot of times it's psoriasis. It has pits in it. So this young lady came, and the doctor who saw her all zoom in was trying every which way, because mom said it had just popped up within 24 hours. She had 0 symptoms, no fever, no chills, and she was covered head to toe, including chest, arms. So we tried to get a history, because a lot of rashes are based off of how did it start. Was she having fever? Was she coughing? Was she having a runny nose? How many days was that? Did it start in the chest? Did it start in the arms? Did it start in the head and then spread everywhere else? All of those are very key. And in this case, according to the mom, she was perfectly healthy until these spots showed up, and she's still doing fine. But the weird thing is, here's her mouth. So also look at the palms, because there's only so many things that can happen if it's on the palms. If you see things on the palms, you're thinking hand, foot, and mouth. You're thinking syphilis is a big one, where I see it on the palms of adults that have no other reason to have a rash. But this young lady has ulcers in her mouth, and they actually go all the way up to the front. And I'm gonna be honest, we didn't figure it out. And God even provided on the trip back an infectious disease Ugandan expert on the plane. And he couldn't figure it out with the pictures in this. But he did say he was headed to a conference in Arizona, and he would love to present this case. So when you have things like this, isolate your, get a mask, because a lot of these are orally transmitted through respiratory droplets. A lot of these are extremely contagious. In this case, we told mom, go home, get her out of the general public until all of this resolves and all the rashes are crusted over. But are we looking at a new disease outbreak, and we're the first people to get pictures of it out of Uganda? I don't know. Is this gonna be something, we were all talking, because me and the other doctor were right up in her face. And we were like, are we gonna go home and in 2 weeks we're gonna have this rash popping out? Fortunately, it doesn't seem like that's the case, but when you're around this, you have to be prepared for running into things that nobody's ever heard about. And if you have to keep a diary or take pictures like I did here, so that if something happens later, you have a diary picture of what happened and how it progressed.
And you just got back from Uganda 4 days ago?
So
no,
it's been about 10 days.
Oh.
I've been able to stop my treatment. This one is a very common one that I took this picture. See the front of the head, see the back of the head. Anybody have an idea what this might be? Mm-hmm. And the villages in Uganda, not typically as often in the primary regions, but in the villages of Uganda, you can see it easily this bad.
Wow.
And several children came in, so many that we started running out of supplies. What we do with them is ideally that we probably do an oral treatment because it's so bad, instead of just topical. But we have something called Gensha Violet, and it's for fungal treatment. You paint it, and it is purple. So we let all the parents know that their kids' hairs are gonna be purple. It tends to turn a little bit of a different color, like a silver or a golden, after a little while on their heads. But if they touch their head while it's wet, they're gonna be purpled up all over. And I didn't get a picture of post-treatment, but we were painting their heads like nobody's business to try and get it under control. But if they go back to the same spot, to the same situation, and their bedding isn't washed and everything else, they're gonna end back up in the same place. And I also found a lot of parents, once I started seeing underneath clothes, had it on their body. And so that's a wash that we would typically use, cause it does discolor, and you usually try to avoid the face, so I was writing it down. I don't know if they can get the wash. It's a specific percentage, but I was writing that down once I realized that some of the parents had it too, for the parents to see if they can get in the country. And so this isn't something scary, it's not something that is going to end their life, but you can tell it's very disfiguring and bothersome as they were to get older to have this in their hair. This young lady, I thought this was a burn, and Dad said it just appeared and just started growing. The yellowy stuff is actually some homemade remedy that they had been pasting and putting on there. So originally I thought maybe it was a staph infection, because their staph and strep are typically skin contaminants. I don't know, but we washed it up, we gave them cleaning instructions, gave them some sterile water, and gave them some ointment to put on there, and sent her home with clean supplies. But in this case, it's starting to spread. It most likely is staph, was my thought, so we gave her some oral antibiotics to help. But like, sometimes we just don't know, and we slap something on it and hope for the best.
Would that be classified as an ulcer at this point?
It's too shallow. An ulcer would be deep. So, but good thought. So I just put it, these are just from the last couple trips. Going back to these ones, this brings up a different topic I wanted to talk about. This young lady was in Albania, I believe, but that's actually her heel.
Which,
So there's her foot, you kind of see it that way. This right there where that thumb is her heel. Doesn't look like a heel. If I had to look at this, I would think it was an elbow. So at some point in her life, it's hard to see, but like she has no heel bone. And so somebody had put her in this brace, and then she wasn't able to do physical therapy, and she basically has no ability to walk on this foot successfully. So she's still in this walking brace. Ideally, if she was in the US, we would do some more treatments and try and rebuild that heel. But it brings up the topic of, just because you have the knowledge, should you share it? Because we say, oh, in the US we would do this, or in the US we would do this. And in this case with this young lady, is telling her there's treatment going to help her feel better? Is it going to help the situation to know that there's treatment out there she can't get? And that's kind of what I was getting at with this young boy. I didn't realize when I took it that it wasn't in focus, or I would have taken a different one, but see how his chest is? We call that pigeon chest is when it's out, and this one is the opposite, so it's pectus excavatum, it's excavating deep inside. And when you compare it to here, that chest piece is probably almost halfway to his back. And this is a patient where I had to look at what the situation was and quickly with prayer decide what was the bigger issue here. Is the issue his health problem, or is there something else going on? Now in this case, the grandmother, the mother are terrified of doctors because grandma had a bad surgery, ended up with a tracheotomy, and that surgeon fled the country and has never been seen since, because they have no control. It's an international world. So they're terrified of anything surgery, but this is gonna be, even in the US, would be a $250,000 surgery if it worked, because even if they pop it out, it can collapse again. And I've had a patient that happened to. It popped out and then it collapsed again. But they came in saying that he's tired, he's crying all the time, he doesn't wanna do anything, he won't eat. And I had to get to the heart of the problem. And the funny thing is this probably is affecting his heart. As deep as this is, as big as it probably is compressing his heart. So there is some legitimacy in their concern and their complaint. He's going to have problems running. He's going to not have the energy capacity but you have enough lung that's around there that lung-wise he should still be able to do relatively okay. It's gonna be more of a heart problem as he grows, depending on how it grows. But I started asking other questions. Why is he not eating? What is going on? Why is he crying? And then I've learned through working with kids, asking what he does eat. Can you guess what he does eat? He does. And you know when he stops crying? When grandma gives him money to go to the store to buy food. And so I did talk with the mom about going to see at least a consultant that's in the country to get some basic care and to at least get an opinion on how bad it is, to get some studies on it, but all through the national system, we can't take responsibility for this patient who's gonna be, who knows how much, if they even agree to fix this. But I could get to the heart problem. The true problem here was an attitude problem. It was a discipline problem. And this family, actually I have a picture in my video of praying with them, because I talked with them and I said, do you know any 21-year-olds that are absolutely useless, that nobody wants to be around, and they still live at home and refuse to work? And mom and grandma go, uh-huh. And I said, well, that's gonna be him if you don't change some things. Because he's crying and refusing to do anything. He has an excuse, but this is not bad enough to where he can't do basic house chores. He's picky because grandma keeps giving him money, and grandma, you gotta stop it. Because if you don't, this young man in another 10 years is gonna be that 21-year-old that you want nothing to do with, who just sits at home all day and cries. And so, yes, I had to deal with the medical piece, but the heart piece was actually the problem with this situation. And I spent almost an hour between grandma, mom, and him. I spent almost an hour with this family. And at the end of that, we were able to stop and pray, and they were, it's a Muslim family. They live in a tent, 24/7, they live in a tent, because her husband won't keep a steady job. And it also sounds like husband is probably abusive physically. But the medical opened up this family to the gospel, to see more than just this. And you're gonna see this in all the countries, even in countries where you're at, you're gonna see where the medical needs open it up to other things. So I just wanted to, so when you see things, do you address them? Here's a question for you, and maybe you've thought about this, maybe you haven't. I'll bring this back up in a second. If you are in Iceland and you see somebody on the side of the road and there's an accident and you see somebody laying down, do you stop? If you're in Eastern Europe and somebody bops you with their car and you're just sitting there, do you get out and check on the other person? If you're in the Philippines and you're driving down the road and a drunk stumbles in front of your car and you hit him, do you stop? It's gonna depend on the country you're in. Do you stop? Now, you're in Iceland, I would hope that they have a less corrupt system. But if you're in Liberia, you better get yourself out of there as fast as possible. And potentially, depending on the situation, you might take yourself and turn yourself in at the police station directly to the head person. Because yeah, you're still gonna get in trouble even though it wasn't your fault, but at least you won't, the mob can't get you. If you're in Eastern Europe, do you stop? Ask the local missionaries before you go. Ask them before you show up and start driving a vehicle. Now in Iceland, again, I would hope that you would stop because it's a first world country. They have laws, and they typically, I would assume, are more like Western Europe, where there's some fairness and things that happen. But in the Philippines, do you stop?
I don't see why you wouldn't stop and get somebody.
So I would ask the local missionaries, because a lot of times, even if it wasn't your fault, they're coming after you with everything they have in them. And you're right, in Liberia, a mob would come get you and they would kill you. And then I was talking with a missionary in Uganda, and her brother was sitting in traffic, literally in a traffic stop, where they were in traffic backup, that's the word. And somebody hit the car next to him, but because he was sitting there, when the police came, everybody said it was the Mzungu, which means foreigner. And they charged him a couple $100 and said he was at fault because he was sitting there in his vehicle, doing nothing. Wasn't even involved in it. His car wasn't even touched. And so, like in Uganda, you don't stop. And if you do stop, you take yourself to the head of the police department and you demand for the head policeman, because they will come after you and it will be your fault no matter what. I asked in Ghana, I said, what happens if you hit somebody's cow or goat or sheep or whatever is wandering off into the middle of the road? And he said, well, if you hit them, you cut off the tail and you go into town and you find out whose sheep it is or whose goat it is, and then you pay him whatever it is. But that's for a local Ghana. What if I'm an American? I'm probably not stopping, I'm probably gonna send somebody else back with that sheep's tail, if I can even find somebody who would be willing to go back. Because in a lot of countries, as an American, they see dollar signs. And if you're in Korea, in Korea, it's a little bit cleaner. In Korea, my pastor was driving somebody, they were getting out on the side of the road, they had a motorcycle going by and didn't know it. The person opened the passenger door, whacked the guy going by on the motorcycle who fell off. They took him to the hospital, paid his hospital bills, and asked him how much he wanted in cash. And that's legal in Korea. In Korea, your car insurance is like barely anything, because even up to the point of outright killing somebody, all you have to do is pay the family whatever they want, and it's called good. And that's legal. So find out before you go, what are you gonna do? If you see somebody on the side of the road, and I was talking with your husband the other day, and he said somebody pulled out of a fishing, or of a water spot, somebody who had been drowning, and they were unconscious. And they did CPR and the person survived with brain damage. Well, the person was unconscious, wasn't breathing, they did CPR, and God bless, the person came back. At least that's what we think, right? But was that the right thing to do? I don't know. But according to her husband, the family came after that individual and made her life very difficult, saying, you're now responsible for all the cost of treatment, you're now responsible for this person's life who's now disabled, who can't do anything. In our Western minds, we say we should do everything. But is our Western ideals of what we should do always what we should do? Just like some people feel very strongly about vaccines and some people feel very strongly against it, it doesn't mean each side is always wrong. So is what we think appropriate to that culture? And if you do decide to intervene, are you prepared for the consequences of that intervention? A young lady named Dunya is Iraqi. She was in a refugee camp. Her parents got saved. The missionary fought to get them out of the country because Dunya would be dead right now if they had not left the country. And God opened the doors. But in opening the door for Dunya to come to the US, it was a lot of God opening those doors. And when she got here, she was able to apply for health care, but she had to be here by September 30th, or the healthcare option would have went away, because that was the deadline to apply for free healthcare for her. If she got here October 1st, nobody would have been able to afford the surgery. God bless, she got here before that deadline. She had her surgery, but Dunya's outcome is that she'll now live to about her early 20s. Dunya is not expected to be a 30, 40, 50-year-old. Dunya will never have children, and she has to be monitored by a specialist the rest of her life, however long or short that is. So yes, Dunya can now play somewhat like a normal child. She's no longer constantly blue. Her body is now able to get some oxygen and grow, but her heart condition is still there. That just gaps, that is kind of a stopgap to allow her a longer life. But is it always our ideals to say, well, we know there's treatment, we should get it? Like this young boy, if he was in the States, there's no doubt he would already have had surgery by now. But for this family, for this situation, is it the right thing? I gave them the knowledge, I let them know the consequences, but beyond that, it has to be the family's choice. So knowing the culture, knowing the situation, and asking the people that are there, and not assuming that what we would want to do is what they would want to do. So I'm gonna transition a little bit, but just wanted to bring some of those thoughts, because as Americans, we want to do everything we can, but is it always the right thing? So it's transitioning to hospital attitudes and differences in culture. Why don't you tell me what you saw when you were in Liberia? What was the hospital like? What was the attitude of the doctors and the nurses, if they had them?
Well, there was one nurse who had been a UN nurse during the Civil War, and he knew what he was doing. All the other guys all said they were doctors, they weren't, they were students. They wouldn't let me keep, I had the tip of this finger hanging off, they wouldn't let me keep it closed and bandaged, which was a problem. You know, the stuff was not, it wasn't clean. The hospital, the clinic wasn't clean, there's blood absolutely everywhere. You know, it was just, was just unnecessary, it's unnecessary. In the future, I would not go back unless my life absolutely depended on it.
So did they end up stitching anything, giving you shots or
They
anything?
they did stitch it eventually,
Okay.
you know, and they tried to give me, morphine. That did not turn out well. They stabbed me through the finger 4 times in a row, all the way through. And then one guy actually stuck it in the bone, and I took it away from him and removed it. It was just a mess. So I'm not saying that they were incompetent as in incapable, but there was definitely, you know.
Some education lack.
Well, yeah. The number 1 leading cause of death in the hospitals in Liberia, including the Elwa Hospital, which is, I wanna say it's AEWE, is one of the best hospitals in the country, is morphine overdose, because even though the nurses are trained to read the amounts and to administer the amounts, they will still just go and suck a syringe full of morphine and shoot the whole thing into a child, and boom, you're done. So, you know, they're willing to learn to a point, but there are some things with the older generation, you just cannot teach them anything, don't even try. And that will get you, it'll get you killed, you know? So it's not necessarily apathy or incompetence, but it's pretty bad. I've sat with the guy that actually administers that hospital in the airport in Monrovia, and that was just a very, it was not an enlightening conversation in a good way. So, you know.
So about Iceland, what kind of hospitals or medical facilities do they have in Iceland?
I haven't been there. Population's 400, I haven't been to the hospital. Population's 400,000. They have access to all modern conveniences, but for anything of more specialized technical skills, oftentimes you'll fly over to Denmark or somewhere in Europe.
So do they have more of a paternalistic healthcare? Do you know what I mean by that?
Not exactly.
So in Germany, the German doctors, you walk in, they tell you what to do and you leave. That's paternalistic. You do what I say, goodbye. There's no explanations,
Oh, no.
there's no, here's what your labs are.
I don't know.
Okay. So that would be something to investigate before you have a need to go. Because I found my American patients, if they knew they were Americans and they came prepared, they could usually insist upon getting an answer. So they would say, I'm going to see the GI doctor, I have bloody diarrhea and I'm an American and it's not something infectious like we talked about yesterday. Well, you're getting a colonoscopy, goodbye. Or you're gonna start this medicine, goodbye. Wait, what is this medicine? What is it going to do? Why am I taking it? But if they went prepared to understand and started out by saying something to the effect of, at some point, look, I need to understand and can you please explain it to me? Sometimes, not always, but sometimes they could get an explanation. Also, there's a difference between the staff and the doctors. The doctors usually spoke English, the staff not always. So do you have enough communication skills to even make the appointment, to even get past the staff to get to the doctor? And that's in all countries.
Would, that experience in Germany, is that kind of a socialized medicine thing, or is that more of a cultural?
I think it's more of a cultural thing.
Okay.
And so.
Is
yeah.
the medical in Germany socialized?
Yeah, it is. But they do have private hospitals if you have insurance to pay for. And if you have private insurance. So Americans, because we usually were military, or Americans who are missionaries, often have our own private insurance because we can't be on the German economy insurance unless you're have a certain type of visa. And so as a result of that, you can usually get appointments pretty fast. But one thing you might run into is it might be 6 months for an appointment, where if you came back to the States, you could get it in 2 months, but your insurance is gonna probably not cover it if you have a European policy. So talking to missionaries in Europe, I know some older missionaries now that are doing about half and half. What does your insurance policy allow? Because the one through my mission board, you can only spend up to 6 months in the US, but if you spend 6 months or more, you cannot be in that policy. And it covers almost everything if you're overseas, but if you're in the US for that, for 4 months, you're paying almost everything out of pocket. whether it's you're in Germany, Liberia, or whatever, it will pay for most of it. And so I know some, vice versa, I know some missionaries that have come back to the States for treatment to get on Medicare, Medicaid, whatever they qualify for, and I've known a missionary right now, you might have known them, the Salmons in Thailand, and Ricky's staying over in Thailand, cause one, that's his ministry, but two, he's now on dialysis and chemo. And it's a heck of a lot cheaper and faster for him to get treatment in Thailand than it is to come back here to the US. And it keeps him on the field. So, is there a country that you can go to outside of Liberia? And is it worth the thing, or are you gonna come back to the States? Missionary in Peru found out he could get MRIs. MRIs are pretty cheap if they have them, but not all MRIs are equal. So, I was just in Uganda, as you know, and one of the missionaries brought me a old-fashioned x-ray looking thing of her MRIs. It was reasonably good, but it was like taking a whole bunch of x-rays. But how many cuts, or how narrow, like how many millimeters between the slices, or what we call them, makes a difference. So yeah, you can get a whole body MRI for like a couple $100, but she had ended up having 3 MRIs over 2 years. One of them said something, the next 2 missed it. And when I looked at the most recent one, I'm like, yeah, it's right there. Has anybody said this? She goes, well, on the very first one they said it. And I'm like, well, it's right here, that what's on the first one. She's like, but they didn't mention it on the other 2. So do you have that independent resource to go somewhere? So the missionary in Peru, we found out he had a mass on his back, which was causing a lot of his back pain. And he was able to find somebody in a different South American country where he got treatment and is doing well, and it cost a fraction of what if he'd come back to the States. So do your research, because sometimes there is an expat hospital in the country next to you, potentially,
Ivory Coast, I think, has some.
where you can get amazing medical care for super cheap, and it's reasonable care. And for you as well, like, which country would you need to go to? Research that before you go see your doctor, if you know kind of an idea what you're looking for. I also found out in Germany, you don't go to the doctor if you think you have a broken bone, you go to the ER. Because I waited till Monday, on Friday night, I now know I broke my arm playing soccer. On Monday morning, I went to the doctor, he pushed on my bone, and it's more of the office that they had for primary care is a desk with a table over on the side. It feels like you're walking into a normal office, like a business office, just happens to have a table. Well, he pushed on my arm, says, you're fine, go ahead. I went back to the States, started lifting my niece and nephew over Christmas, and said, wow, this is really killing me again. I walked around for months holding my arm like this because I didn't know what was wrong. I thought it was a sprain. Went to my American doctor, and I said, I snapped, I was on the floor seeing stars. He goes, go get an x-ray, and I had a nice little callus where God bless, and it healed completely straight. I went back to Germany and told my friends, and they said, oh, well, you should have went to the ER if you thought you broke it.
Well, you were fine though, right?
I was fine.
You were.
But what if that had been something more serious? And it healed crooked. Now, I was very blessed that it healed completely straight, and it healed just as good as if I'd been in a cast. But it would have been nice to have known before that if you think you snap something, you go to the ER. But the ERs in Germany are run by Eastern Europeans and Asians, typically, who were there because in Germany with the socialized medicine, they have a system where there's only maybe 50 slots for family practice, 10 slots for ENT, 2 slots for a neurologist in that entire region. And until somebody dies or gives up that slot, nobody else can move in. And so those are the slots everybody wants. So the Western European doctors brain drain to the North America or to someplace they can make money because they can't stay in their own city. And the ones that are in the hospital are all the Central Eastern Europeans and Asians who come over who are willing to work in what would be an 80-hour work week. The Germans don't want to work 80 hours. So when they graduate, they leave because they can't get a slot where they're happy because it's so controlled. So when you go, just like here, when you go to the ER, I was in Guyana, and the doctor that came to help us was from India. So you can potentially use your skills and other things and make connections with foreigners just by going to see the doctor. So you're gonna find that in Iceland potentially. I just don't know how the Iceland system, if they only how they allow people from foreign countries to practice there.
I think it's still pretty closed, but there's been a lot of immigration in the last 20
Yeah.
years. But
Yeah.
they try to protect
Mhm.
their economy for Icelanders a little
Yeah.
bit.
You can get
Yeah.
some work visas with, higher level degrees in Iceland. I would think probably medical field is one of the only fields they would bring Americans in.
With that
Or
small
behind.
population, they'll probably outsource
I
a
imagine
lot.
they would bring in Germans before Americans.
Right, or
All-
British.
All
Right,
Europeans
or
before
British,
Americans.
yeah.
Well, that's kind of the basis.
Standard.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be my thought too. So, each culture you go to is gonna have a different system. In the Philippines, they have some really bad hospitals, but they have some really good hospitals too. And I've trained with people who trained in the Philippines, and I've worked alongside them, and some of them have amazing medical skills and care because of the things they got to do in the Philippines. I mean, we have some amazing Filipino nurses all over North America. And so you're gonna be going into a health system that for the most part, you could get better care if you can get to that hospital. So finding out when you go, if you do need emergency care, where's the spot that everybody recommends, would be a key for you.
Capital city.
And then maybe make some connections with the local hospital. Sometimes we bring medical care in, and we found out a missionary, the one that that I'm working with in Ghana, he's a national pastor. Somebody was already sending him a crate, so some people had asked about some medical equipment. He asked one of the local hospitals and was able to get that equipment to them in that crate that was already going. And so as a result, he got to give that to that hospital, and now they're willing to work with him. And now they're willing to listen to him, and they have a better relationship. But like you learned, you might be the person who might be walking in and saying, I need this antibiotic and this, but make sure before you say that, you have it at least looked up to make sure that's what should be happening. Because otherwise, just like that lady whose son had, dengue, if I hadn't sent her that information and she continued with her original plan, she would have actually harmed her son instead of trying to help him. But with that knowledge that she gleaned from the article I sent her, she was able to go to the hospital and tell them what she wanted, and they did it. And her son, fortunately, God brought him through it. So if you're going to go to the hospital and say, do this, 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 and this, in a third world country, make sure you actually have some backing behind you, because I would hate for you to harm your own family or somebody in your ministry, from assuming and